Once your team has looked at some initial data, one of the early tasks of the improvement science process is crafting a problem statement. Crafting your problem statement well will help your team avoid a common mistake. We call this mistake solutionitis. The problem of solutionitis is familiar to most veteran educators. It's the prevalence of this solutionitis that led places like the Carnegie Institute to develop improvement science tools for education. In a blog, the Carnegie Institute's Lillian Kivel describes it this way, starting in the second paragraph. In this rush to solve problems quickly, we often fail to truly understand the problem itself. Too often, these proposed solutions are not responsive to the conditions that actually define the problem or sensitive to the ways that the system contributes to or enables the problem. The education field has a culture of solutionitis, constantly jumping to implement solutions before fully developing a clear sense of what is creating the problem. One of the goals of the improvement science process is to cure this solutionitis in education. This is why it's important for our problem statements to focus on investigation as opposed to diagnosis. Let's look at that more closely. We want to make sure that the problem statement that we craft calls us to investigate the problem in the system as opposed to diagnosing it. Before we start to diagnose a problem of practice, we want to be able to investigate and understand it using improvement science tools. To that end, we need a simple, clear description of the problem we are seeing in the data. Let's take a look at an example of a good problem statement. For our sample problem statement, we're going to look at some data collected by UTSA's Urban Education Institute. This data display represents survey responses from students and parents across 8 different San Antonio, Texas school systems. This survey was conducted during the spring of 2020, while the COVID-19 pandemic had students learning from home. This specific data display represents the responses to a single question from that survey. It shows us the percent of students with caregiving responsibilities at home who said that these responsibilities reduced their ability to keep up with school by school system. Let's imagine a group of educators from Northside ISD were investigating this data as a part of an improvement science project. We can imagine the problem that might jump out to them as they look at the data. Northside ISD has one of the highest percentage, in fact the second highest percentage out of all the school systems surveyed for students with caregiving responsibilities who said that those responsibilities reduced their ability to keep up with school by a significant margin. Now we can imagine those educators beginning to craft a really clear, simple problem statement. Their first version of that problem statement might look something like this that we see in the yellow. 65% of students in NISD with caregiving responsibilities report a reduced ability to keep up with school. That's a good first version problem statement. They might want to make that more specific and dig further into what it is that bothers them about that percentage and add this to their statement, which is a higher percentage than 6 out of the other 7 school systems surveyed by 10% or more. That's it. That's their very simple, clear problem statement that avoids going into diagnosis or trying to attempt to solve the problem, and instead gives them a clear path forward for investigation. As your team looks at data and begins to craft a problem statement, that's what you want to keep in mind. Let's remember a few things before you do that. As you craft a problem statement, make sure you avoid jumping to a diagnosis and/or solutions. Make sure to keep your statement clear, simple, and based on what you can see in the data. Be specific with data when possible. And remember that the problem statement is meant to facilitate investigation of the problem and system through the application of tested tools. So avoid offering diagnosis or solutionitis. Following these key takeaways will allow you to craft an appropriate problem statement for our improvement science journey.